She climbed the steps slowly, only 22 years old. Dressed in white, her hair pulled back, she moved with grace through the silent crowd that surrounded her. At the top of the stairway, the blade already awaited her. It was September 11, 1599, in Rome, and Beatrice Cenci, young, noble, and beautiful, was about to lose her head. But why? Was she being punished for her beauty? For daring to be a woman in a patriarchal world? Or for having the courage to defy a monster? This is not the story of war or politics. This is a story of brutal power, deadly silence, and a woman who paid for her defiance with her blood. On this episode of Torture Vault, we unravel the tragic life and execution of Beatrice Cenci, a symbol of injustice and resistance, whose true crime may have been simply existing in the wrong place, at the wrong time, in the wrong family. To understand why this young woman was publicly beheaded, we must go back to the beginning, to the Cenci Palace, one of the most powerful and wealthy families in Rome. Behind its marble facades lay secrets, pain, and horror. The head of the house was Francesco Cenci, a man feared even by his own servants. Francesco was more than rich. He wielded political influence, owned vast lands, and had powerful friends in the Vatican. But what he had in wealth, he lacked in humanity. There was something twisted about him, something dark that no one dared to speak aloud. And the target of his obsession was his own daughter, Beatrice. Beatrice was born in 1577 in Rome, a time when being a woman was itself a burden. But being a woman, beautiful, and the daughter of Francesco Cenci, that was a curse. Francesco never saw her as his child. He saw her as an object, a possession he could own and control. From an early age, Beatrice lived in a gilded prison, surrounded by wealth, but without the simplest freedom. Francesco kept her isolated from the outside world, hidden from eyes that might admire her or, worse, try to take her away from him. As she grew older, the situation worsened. By the time she was 15, Francesco's behavior had become more than cruel, it was predatory. He would barge into her chambers without warning, stare at her as she dressed, and make disturbing comments about her body. When Beatrice protested, he used his absolute authority to silence her. Servants whispered about screams coming from her room at night. They spoke of locked doors, sobs behind walls, and a beautiful young girl slowly losing her sanity. Francesco had turned his daughter into a prisoner and himself into her tormentor. Beatrice tried to seek help. She wrote secret letters, begged trusted servants to deliver messages to her relatives. But who would dare speak against Francesco Cenci, a man with influence in the Vatican and the law in his pocket? No one would believe a girl over such a man. No one dared. The situation grew more terrifying when Francesco decided it was time for Beatrice to marry, but not for her freedom. He planned to wed her to a man he could control, someone who wouldn't question the unusual dynamics of their marriage. It was another trap. But then, fate intervened. Beatrice met a young soldier named Olimpio Calvetti. He was stationed at the family's rural castle. Unlike the suitors Francesco arranged, Olimpio was kind, respectful, and truly cared for her. In secret, they fell in love. Their romance blossomed behind closed doors and exchanged letters, full of hope and desperation. For the first time in her life, Beatrice saw a way out. Olimpio promised to help her escape, to free her from her father's prison. But their love story came crashing down when Francesco discovered the affair. His rage was immediate. He had Olimpio dismissed and confined Beatrice to her room. Surveillance increased. The punishments worsened. Francesco had turned from a tyrant to something even more dangerous, a paranoid monster. That's when the idea of murder began to grow. Beatrice, her stepmother Lucrezia, and her brother Giacomo began to plan the unthinkable, the death of Francesco Cenci. It was not only about love anymore, it was survival. The plan was both desperate and dangerous. While visiting the family's rural Petrella castle in September 1598, they arranged for two hired assassins to end Francesco's life. The murder was brutal but swift. That night, the tyrant died in his sleep. The killers made it look like an accident, a fall from a balcony. At first, it worked. No one suspected the Cenci family. Francesco was widely hated. He had enemies in Rome, unresolved debts, and political feuds. But just weeks later, suspicion turned to Beatrice and her family. Why? Because she was beautiful. Because she was a woman. And because Pope Clement VIII needed a public example. Rome at the time was filled with powerful noble families that often escaped justice. The Pope wanted to send a message. No one was above the law, not even a noble girl with a tragic past. The investigation that followed was nothing short of a performance. Torture was used liberally. Servants were brutalized until they confessed to whatever story the authorities wanted to hear. Beatrice's fate was sealed long before she saw a courtroom. She and her entire family were imprisoned in dark, damp cells. The trial was nothing more than theater. Beatrice spoke of her abuse, of the years of suffering, of Francesco's cruelty, but none of it mattered. The judges weren't there to hear her story. They were there to confirm her guilt. When the sentence was announced, it stunned all of Rome, not because of the crime, but because of the punishment. Beatrice would be publicly beheaded. Her brother Giacomo would be tortured and then killed. The youngest son was spared only because he was too young to face execution. As the execution day approached, a strange thing happened. Rome began to rally around Beatrice. Nobles, scholars, merchants, and even priests began pleading for her life. Letters poured into the Vatican. People argued that she was a victim, that she had suffered enough, that she had acted out of desperation. But Pope Clement refused. In his eyes, Beatrice had become too popular, too loved. He feared that sparing her life would make her a symbol of rebellion. He couldn't let that happen. Beatrice Cenci would die. Not just for murder, but to crush the idea that someone like her could defy power and lie. On September 11, 1599, the Sant'Angelo Bridge was packed with people. Some came to witness a spectacle. Others came to mourn. Dressed in white like a bride, Beatrice walked with serenity and silent dignity. Her calm presence moved even the executioner. His hands trembled as he raised the blade. But orders were orders. With a single blow, her head fell. The crowd didn't cheer. No one celebrated. Instead, there was a haunting silence. Rome knew it had witnessed something deeply wrong. In the days that followed, flowers were laid where her blood had stained the stone. But the question remains, was Beatrice guilty? Historical records show Francesco Cenci was indeed a monster. He abused his children, especially Beatrice. The confessions used in court were extracted under torture. No real justice was served. If she did conspire in his death, it was self-defense. If she didn't, then her death was the murder of an innocent. Either way, the verdict was the same: injustice. Over time, Beatrice Cenci's story spread across Europe. She became a tragic muse for poets, artists, and writers. Paintings were made of her serene, pale face. Plays and novels turned her into a legend. But perhaps the darkest part of this story is not what happened centuries ago, but that stories like hers still happen. Women still suffer in silence. Still face violence in the shadows. Still pay with their lives for standing up to power. Beatrice Cenci died at 22, a victim of patriarchy, control, and cruelty. Her beauty became her curse. Her courage became her crime. Her youth became her death sentence. She wasn't executed for being evil. She was executed for being inconvenient. For threatening the system by refusing to remain silent. Here on Torture Vault, we tell the stories that history tried to bury. The stories where cruelty hides behind law, and justice is often nowhere to be found. Beatrice's blade did not just end her life. It sliced through the illusions of justice in Renaissance Rome. And though her voice was silenced that day, her story continues to speak. 4 centuries later, we still remember her not as the criminal they claimed, but as the victim she truly was.